Hi, I'm Kelly from Center for Informed Grief, and today we're going to continue our discussion about grief and loss. And I'm going to ask Karyn a question. And so we'll go ahead and get started with that. And so, one of the things that we hear so common is about timeline. How long am I going to feel this way? Am I supposed to still be grieving after this long? Why don't I feel better? When is it gonna get easier? So my question is it normal to be grieving after 7 years?
Yes. So I hear this every day in every group. And actually, with my groups, as we go around, people introduce themselves, who they are, who they lost. And we do talk about timelines as a framework. But then I'll always say to people, but then that's the last time we're going to really focus on your timeline, because wherever you are is where you are. You're here today to talk about it. Clearly, if you're needing support, we don't want to be using your time of how much time has passed to be the judgment. To me, the simplest answer to this is the fact that we have a tendency to use a date on the calendar to define what our grief is and where it should be. Oh, this happened in 2019, or this happened, 6 months ago. And we think there's some sort of like formula of what that should mean and where we should be at based on that timeline. So, what I say to people though is it's not a past event. Your grief is a present event. It may have occurred, the passing of the person on that date, but you experienced the loss and the grief. It happened yesterday. It happened today. It will happen tomorrow because they're not here, and you're struggling without them. You're trying to make these adjustments without them. And that's what I almost wish they could explain to the people around them, because I think that's also where a lot of the timeline stress comes from, is because people have this sort of, whether it's real and they've had people say it to them, or it's sort of this imagined sense that people are judging them or expecting them to move on, and that they then, as we said before, feel like they're doing something wrong.
Exactly. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and I think grief isn't something we get over, it's something we learn to live with. And
Right.
for some of us, we do that grief work right away. I'll have clients and it'll be 2 days since their loved one died and they're calling me to get in
Mm.
already to counsel. And I'm like, okay, we need to give you a little bit of time
Yeah.
to actually even feel this, right? It probably hasn't even hit you at this point yet.
Right.
And then there's some people that are coming to me 12, 15, 20 years later because they had earlier losses that they didn't necessarily lean into and process.
Yes.
And so it's not something that necessarily, it doesn't have a timeline. It looks different for everybody. When people are like, well, how long is this going to take? And I'm like, everybody's different. I've had clients that I've worked with and they've gotten through that first anniversary of the death and they're okay. And they're like, I think I'm good. I don't really need anything. Then there's some people that second year is worse than the first year.
Hmm.
And some people need more continuation of, grief counseling. Everybody's just so different. And I know for me, I'm 29 years out since my mom's death. And last night I was in a group and it was our memorial slideshow. And, we have mentors, we have volunteers in the group and everything. And so I stuck a picture of my mom in the slideshow, which I never do. And nobody probably even knew it was my mom, but I
Yeah.
just stuck it in there. And then, boy, that came up and the tears started coming down. I'm like, this is why I don't do this.
Yeah.
But it just shows like my grief, yeah, on a daily basis. Does that come up? No. But are there certain things that trigger it and bring it up for me? Yes. And that's okay
Yeah.
because there isn't a timeline on this. This is something that I'm probably going to deal with on some level for the rest of my life.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. And there's different things that affect the timelines, because sometimes people will almost try and find their grief equivalent. Like this woman that I worked with, like her mom died 2 years ago. She seems to be fine. My mom died 2 years ago. I'm not doing fine at all. And it's like, well, here's all the other factors that contribute to that. It can be how it happened is a big part of it. I feel like if it happened suddenly, that pushes back, when the grief even really begins, frankly, because you're in such shock and disbelief for a very long time. I know anytime when I worked for hospice and we had someone call it like 10, 11 months, and they're like, hey, it's my first time, I'm looking for grief support. a lot of times, not all the times, but they had a sudden loss, as opposed to someone who like 3 months out that lost their loved one on hospice, that maybe felt they had a little more time. So there's that. There's the nature of the relationship, and the proximity in terms of how much time this person was a part of our day-to-day life and our routines and our roles, identities, all those things. um and just the adjustment period, I think, is going to therefore be greater. Also, what supports we have, what other things do we have going on? If we immediately lose someone and then have to jump into caring for somebody else, that may push off our grieving and our
Absolutely.
timeline, so that we don't even start until 2 years later or something. Or the people that you hear about that they lost someone. I have had, you talked about your dad getting you in a grief group, which is wonderful. That's not always the case necessarily. And I'll talk to people that lost a parent when they were young, and now they're finding like they're struggling in their relationships and they're feeling angry in places. And you know someone somewhere pointed out, like, this may be your grief, that's
Mhm.
been unresolved. And if there's not the full expression of it, I always say it's very patient, it'll wait, it's gonna come out.
Exactly. It finds its way. That's what I always
Yes.
say. And one
Yeah.
way or another, it's gonna show back up if you don't
Absolutely.
maybe make space for it and lean into it.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So, I think that's why also those comparisons, which I think is what timelines sort of do, is set expectations and everything else. It's just when we say it's unique, it's really unique. And, I always say to everybody, like, get a piece of paper, write the word why on top, and then underneath list all the reasons why this is hard for you.
Mhm.
What's your unique situation? Maybe you just moved. Maybe again, you have your own health issues. Maybe there's estrangements in your family. Like, beyond the grief itself, which is already big enough, you have your whys that are making your loss different than the people even within your own family, frankly. There's going to be differences. Yeah, for sure.
And one of the things I find really interesting in talking about is grief math, right?
Mm,
We
yeah.
do this, well, it's been this long since they died. It's been this many birthdays without them. I know when I turned 28, I was like, I've spent now half of my life without my mom.
Mm,
And I saw even one of my sisters this past year, she was officially older than my mom ever was.
mm, yeah.
And she had that down to the day, right? And shared that and talked about that. Like, now I'm older than mom ever got to be. And we do this math with us, like that we think about our grief that, oh, we're supposed to be at a different place, or we're not supposed to feel this way, or it's been this long. And, it's really quite interesting how we do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think what that highlights too is the secondary losses and the loss of future. And
Exactly.
so it's the reason why people are crying at weddings 5 years later,
Mhm.
because the person's not there and we wish you were there. And it's like, first of all, this is a happy occasion. Second of all, I thought I was doing okay. Like, so it'll pop up in good times and bad, at different points, or if something's really falling apart and it's like, I wish they were here to help me, take care of me, whatever it may be. So there's a real loss of future that
Absolutely.
I think absolutely will explain why we're going to feel it
Mhm.
at different points in life, good, bad, or otherwise.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, great answers. Thank you. And so stay tuned for more questions and answers. Take care.